All right, welcome. This is the decision support tool training for Wasrag. I'm going to show you the tool that was created to help Wasrag identify needs of a community, assess a community, identify possible solutions in order to meet those needs. And so this is an Excel document, Excel workbook that consists of many sheets, which you can see across the bottom here. And I'm going to walk you through each one. They're mostly a data collection protocol, so it'll ask you some questions and you'll provide answers. And then at the end, there's some tabs that pull together all of the data to give some outputs to help you make better decisions and write your reports. So the way this is going to be formatted, I'm going to talk through each one of the tabs, and at the beginning there's some introduction and instructions, and then there are the data collection tabs, and at the end there are decision support tabs. First I'm going to go through the introduction and instructions, then I'm going to show you the outputs so you have an idea where we're going. I'll go back and walk through step by step all of the data input, and then we'll talk again about the outputs, and we'll put in some data along the way and see how those outputs change and how they can be used. So first, you'll see that this first tab is titled Introduction. There's about 4 paragraphs on the left here that talk about the purpose of the tool and how to implement the tool. So this is an important piece to read before you get started. The next tab is the Instructions tab. There's a few paragraphs also that kind of describe what's going on, and then below you can see there's a kind of a table here where green shows that it's an input, red is an optional input, and blue is an example input. And those are things that you shouldn't change. They're intended to show how to put in pieces of data that we thought might be complicated. And the tab nomenclatures at the bottom for the data categories, they're all numbered. So you can see down here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for decision support, which are the tabs at the end, they're labeled DS before them, so you can keep track of what's going on. So now I'm going to skip to those decision support tabs so you can see where this is all going. So the first one I'm going to look at is the community profile, and it's the first output from implementing the tool. So the community profile collects all of the data across the various categories and uses some algorithms that are behind the scenes to rank the community and give it a level score for each of the categories. So you can see the categories listed on the left here: service, environmental, social, cultural, institutional, human resource, technical, energy, and financial. The levels, this will be automatically updated as you input data. So right now they're all 1, which is the lowest category, but it can go up to 5. So it's a ranking from 1 to 5, and each one of those is tied to a description of what that category means. So that's listed here on the right. So right now we see for service, level 1 means very poor. For human resource, level 1 means basic or illiterate labor force. So these will automatically update as well as the community profile gets generated through the data input. And then one step further is the matching tab. And so this matching tab is a conglomeration of that community profile and also some ratings of different technologies. So don't be overwhelmed right now by this tab. It'll make more sense at the end. But I just wanted to show it to you because you see on the left here in red currently are a bunch of different technology options. So at the beginning here we have water sources. So if you need to develop a new water source, you have a variety of options. And we'll look at, for example, at number 14, which is a dug well. So based on the data that's been input throughout the data collection, these cells here going across to the right will change different colors, and green is good, red is bad, and yellow is in the middle. And based on those assessments, the technologies on the left, or the solutions on the left, will change colors from red, green to yellow, red, green, and yellow. So right now they're all red, which means it's because there's no data in there, so none of the solutions really fit. But at the end, hopefully, it's highlighted a few green solutions, which should be sustainable right away, that the community is capable of sustaining them. Yellow solutions mean there's a couple shortcomings, but those could be addressed depending on what they are through educational programs or something else. So those are possible solutions as well. In red solutions, there's two possibilities. Either one, they're not feasible at all. For example, seawater here, you would never use seawater as a water source if there was no seawater, if you weren't close to the ocean. It's expensive as well, but it'll get ruled out immediately because it's not a feasible possibility. And the other possibility for a red solution is that the community capabilities are not even close to being able to sustain it. So seawater may also fall into that category. It's expensive and highly technical, so if the community ranks low on those categories, it won't match up very well. So those are the two major outputs. We're going to go back to the beginning and look through the data that leads to these outputs, and hopefully these will make a little bit more sense as we move through. So back to the introduction. The next tab is instructions, which we've already talked about. And then we get into the categories. So a little bit of background on how the categories are formatted. For each category, there'll be a tab just before it that's labeled intro. And it'll look just like this. It's yellow boxes. And the first one will say section intro, and it says read first. It's a basic description of the point of that section, of that category. And then below is collection method. So the collection method will not specify a specific collection method to use, but it'll give some suggestions on what might be the best ways. It's important to take into consideration the context that you're working in and the relationships that you have, because those are going to have a lot of influence on your the best collection method for you in order to collect the right and accurate data. So be sure to read these two pieces before you start on your section. So now we have the basic info section. So I'll walk through this as if we were assessing a community, and I'll put in some fake data that we can use at the end. So very beginning, it's pretty straightforward. I already have some of this filled in actually. It asks for the country, the region, the city, the community, the sub-community. So for example, if we'll take Honduras here, and I'm going to leave region out, you'll notice this yellow note mentions that because different places around the world use different terminology, you may have to change some of these categories or skip certain ones. So we go to the city, it's in San Pedro Sula. The community is El Merendon, and there's a sub-community that I'm just going to use Nuevo Eden. For example, this is not a real example. Then it asks for population, so you can input population, area, coordinates if they're available, and settlement type. So for settlement type, we'll notice this throughout. Some of these fields have drop-down menus, especially the ones that have finite set of possible answers. So for here, you'll hit the drop-down menu, and you can select rural, peri-urban, urban, or urban center slum. These are both, we're going to say, rural communities. So the next question is, if it's rural, what is the distance in minutes to a city with construction materials? And you can input that here. So you can say El Merendon's 45 minutes, maybe Nuevo Eden is a little bit further back in the community, and maybe it's 60 minutes to construction materials. And there's a section on the side here that asks for notes. So this is also a theme throughout the inputs. That we left a section for notes if anything is outstanding. You can type it in there. So the next section is a community breakdown. It asks for average household size, so say 6. And then here's a unique thing that's also common throughout the entire tool. It asks for the source. So if this was found through household survey, an expert person, or a report, you can indicate that there. So say you read a report and it mentioned, and it was the population report of El Merendon, for example. So you can type that in so you have a record of where the information came from, and any additional notes again here. The next section is major industry or occupation. So that can be agricultural, it can be manufacturing, whatever exists there. So we'll say this is an agricultural community, and we'll say that they first occupation is a coffee producers, and then you have grains, and then maybe we'll just say fruit. So it's best if you can put in 3 of these. If there's more, you can list them here below. There's some more categories, 4, 5, and 6 for you to spaces for you to input data. So the next one is average household income for the target population converted to USD. So it's important that all of this, because it's going into various algorithms to output the data at the end, it's important to have a common unit. So, for example, if you're working somewhere and you find out that the average is maybe 40,000 of the local currency, you can type it into your additional notes, and when you get back to internet or to something where you can do a conversion, you can make the conversion and then input your response. So maybe that's 300 USD annually. And there's also, again, source and title of source. Are there any evident income disparities? So this is there's 4 choices here. You have yes, small amount of the population holds the majority of the wealth. Yes, there are 2 or more distinct economic groups. And then yes, a few members of the community have moderately higher incomes. And then no, there are only minor variations in income, but nothing extreme. So you can choose the answer that fits best with this community. So the next section is weather. This can come from an online source, wherever you can best find it. There's an example online source here that's pretty good at providing basic weather information. If you need one, it's weatherbase.com. You can search by town, village, city name, or select the closest municipality to record this weather data. And it's pretty basic: average rain, high temps, low temps, and you can input that as you go. And there's also, so you see it's January, February through August. It goes to October, November, December below. There's a total, which will automatically update, and then there's a units category. So if you do it average rain in inches or in centimeters, you can indicate that. And then same with temperature, Fahrenheit or Celsius. That will automatically populate here. I can give an example. We put in this rain data. You can see that the average rain graph populates itself. The last section is a map section, and these can be pulled from Google Maps. You can take a screenshot of the region of interest, however you would like to do it, but you can just add an image here, and this is just a way to keep track of information. So that's it for basic info. Next section is a stakeholder analysis. You can again see the intro and the collection method. So stakeholder analysis is intended just for you to be able to document the important parties that are acting in and on the community. And you can do this as you go through. You don't have to do it first. You can do part of it at the beginning, and then as you come across different groups, you can add them to this list and people that you interview. But it's split up. On the left here, you have community, government, Rotary and non-Rotary collaborators, donors, and then other. And then just to the right, you have some examples of each of these categories. So for community, you have households, you have minority groups, community leaders, WASH-related actors. If there's there's people in the community actively pursuing water and sanitation work, or local organizations. For government, you have a Ministry of Health, an environmental agency, and you can see as you go down there's more examples. So here I'll go through this example. We see the blue shaded areas here, and it'll show you how to input data. So you would type the name of the, so we have example organization. You would write their major stake or their interest in the project or ways in which they'd be affected by the project. So this sample organization is a community organization that builds biosand filters in the village. And so build biosand filters in the village is entered there. Contact information, John Smith, the director, johnsmith@email.com, and his phone number. And then you can write whether they're primary or secondary stakeholders. So they're directly related, so you would check a primary stakeholder. And you go through, and this is really just intended to help you think about the people that are at work in the community and keep track of their information, which is good for long-term project sustainability to have all of this in one place. So the next tab is called History General. There's a detailed history at the end, which is why it's called General. And there's a very basic set of questions that are asked about a variety of technological options. And so this list on the left, it will be generated prior to you using the list. But there is a way at the end, and I'll get to this when we get towards the end of the spreadsheet. You can add additional, it's still in Spanish here, you can add additional technologies that you encounter. But the questions that are asked, pretty straightforward. So we'll look through, does this solution exist in the community? So is it a technology or a source that's being used by members of the community? Is the whatever it is currently functioning properly? So for example, if you have a drilled well, you get a drop-down box, you select yes, and maybe it's been broken for a while, so it's not currently functioning. Is the technology managed? So this, is there somebody, a group, a person that's responsible for ensuring that it's repaired or that the water is allocated, whatever it may be, you can select. So maybe it is managed, but it hasn't been repaired. And if you answer yes to it being managed, you would say the local water board may be in charge of managing this drilled well. Or maybe it's a household, so you can also put household in here. And you can go through and you can look through all the solutions. It's most likely that a lot of them are going to be no, so you just check the ones that do exist, and that comes into the decision-making process at a later point. We can see, here we go, the yellow comment box here. It says add solutions to this list on the Solution Evals tab toward the end of the workbook. So if you come across something that isn't on the list but does exist in the community, there is a Solution Evals tab that's located at the end, and we'll get there, and you can add additional solutions there, and it will update all the way through this entire workbook. Alright, so for number 4, we have service levels, service/use levels. So this is probably the most complicated of all of the spreadsheets, just to be upfront. It will take probably some estimation and talking to people who know a lot about the community to try to estimate the water access in liters per capita per day. There are some basic categories. I'll quickly flip down to that, and this is the whole point of this section, really. As you have quantity in liters per capita per day, and all of these categories mean different things and are different levels. So we have very poor, poor, almost adequate, adequate, and then abundant is above 60. And so the point of this sheet is to understand if there's a shortage of water. Not necessarily clean water, but a shortage of water itself. Because in that case, you would need to develop a new source. But if there's plenty of water and it's just dirty, then you need to develop treatment options, possibly. And maybe a new source, maybe a cleaner source. But there's a lot of information that can be garnered from this tab. And so there's a couple ways to do it. And the first way is this community-wide estimates box at the top here. And you can see there's green boxes because that is probably the easiest thing to do. And there's this little yellow note here. So I'll start with the community-wide estimates. The total population, which you should have been able to get in your basic info. So say it's 5,000 people, and then an estimated water access in liters per capita per day. This can be gathered, again, in lots of different ways, but say you know it. Say you're able to figure out they have approximately 30 liters per capita per day. And that is going to update all of these other fields. Your source is a report. Say it came from the local water board. And you can type that in and any additional notes. So you have almost adequate as your classification. And that's gone down here and updated all the way through to this final classification point. And this table you can see almost adequate, and it's updated the community assessment at the end. If this is not known, you can see this note here. This section and the following only need to be used if it is a helpful way to calculate the water access. So if you get this from a report or you talk to lots of people and they seem to know and it seems accurate, you can input it directly. If you don't know this, you can use this workbook that's provided here with the red input boxes, which are optional. So it's broken down into utilities, private, which is number of wells and surface water, and vendors. And so you can make some estimates for all the different actors that may be providing water, and that can help you come up with the estimated water access. So maybe there's a utility, local water, and they deliver, I don't know, 50,000 liters a day to 10,000, let's say 5,000 customers. So that's going to be 10 liters per capita per day, and it covers 100% of the population, because we know our total population is 5,000. And that's a poor classification on its own, but maybe there's also some private, some people have wells, so of the 5,000, say 2,000 have individual wells. It's a made-up example, that's quite a bit, but say per day, per well, they get an extra 10, and that serves maybe 2,000 of the population. Then you can have surface water, you can have vendors, you do all the same things, and then you end up with totals, and it'll change this liters per capita per day, and you'll end up with your final classification. So you don't need to touch any of this, it'll all do it automatically. You just need to be able to enter this information as you go. So then at the bottom there's also an average distance traveled per day to reach a water source, and so this is in distance, time, and then there's source and report title. So this example, it's maybe 6 kilometers. It takes about 30 minutes. So it's 3 kilometers each way, so 6 total. They go once a day and takes about 30 minutes, and so you can input that data here. And that's it for service. So now for environmental. I skipped over the intro again. We have environmental capacity. So here's another set of basic questions to answer. So first one, is surface water available? So there's a lake, there's a river, there's a stream nearby, anything, you say yes here. So rivers or streams. So let's say there is a river nearby. The river is named example river. Now the question, is the river polluted with untreated wastewater or any other obvious pollutant? If no, you enter no. If yes, you enter the symptoms that are in this drop-down box. And if this doesn't cover what you see, you can enter some more in the notes section at the end. So your possibilities are no, turbid, cloudy, or dirty water, color and or odor, salty taste, bitter taste, difficulty forming a lather with a soap, blue stains or corroded copper pipes, rotten egg smell, which is sulfide, or scaling on pots or kettles. And so maybe there's a couple of these. So maybe you have salty taste, And maybe there's also color or odor. But if there's no third, you just can leave it blank. So you can put up to 3 of the answers in here. So then it says, do pollution levels vary with seasons? It's a yes or no, and you can enter more details in the notes section. So we're going to say that it does. Average distance to an access point on the river to the community. So say it's 3 kilometers away. Is the flow seasonal, such that the source dries or is reduced to critically low levels? Most rivers are going to be seasonal, but the important part is to understand whether it gets critically low. And so say no for this one, just for this example. Is the resource currently being used for drinking water? Yes. We'll say yes. You can say yes or no there. And then which of the following describes the water body? So there's a few descriptions here. Swimming, people use it for swimming and washing. There's sewage discharge, houses with domestic waste entering the waterway. So a house disposes waste straight into the river. Storms wash fecal matter or other contaminants in. Intensive agriculture industries in the area. Recontamination prior to use. So there's storage issues with this being used as a water source. There's domesticated animals and animal husbandry in the area. Stagnant water, so maybe it's a lake or a river that dries up and leaves pools. Chemical processing industry or fuel storage nearby. Storm or water coming from population centers, so this is pretty common, especially if you're in a peri-urban or urban setting. Or there's weed spraying along the watercourse. So you have lots of choices here, and again, you have 3. You can put up to 3, so we're going to enter a couple in here. And then section for notes. So you can enter up to 4 rivers, and if you need to add more, you can do the old right-click, insert, and it will insert another row, and so you can add another river. So same thing for lakes, and it's pretty much the same set of questions, just made for a lake. So you can enter those things in there. So next question, this one's pretty straightforward. Is seawater within a distance that would make it reasonable source if technology were available? It's a yes or no. It's most likely going to be a no. Now there's some questions about well water that you can answer, and these are all yes or no questions. Based on local experience, is water table diminishing? Is water fresh, i.e. is there no salt? Do well levels vary significantly over time, or is there evident pollution? And you can enter all that information. The next questions are about source protection. They're all yes, no as well, and you can read a few questions there. And at the bottom here, as you, maybe we should answer a couple of these. So you just saw at the bottom here the level jumped. So based on my answers, I'm trying to answer all these questions pretty favorably to get it to jump up. Because I skipped some data input at the beginning. So that made it jump all the way up to 4. But as you enter your questions, you can see how it's affecting the community assessment here. And you have the descriptions of the levels and then the level that this community is at listed right next to it. And also at the bottom here, one note, there is an area to insert testing results if that's applicable. If there are testing results available, you can insert rows and insert the appropriate table here so that you have it all in one place. So I'm going to move on to the social and cultural score. So this one is very straightforward, lots of yes or no questions. And they're organized in 5 categories here. We have community organization, stability, equity, caste systems, or participation of women. And again, you have you can see the feedback. So I'm going to put in some random answers here. that will give us a score. And if you look at the bottom there, hopefully we'll see the score jump up. So there we see it jump to 3. And if you answer all the questions, it has a full data set to evaluate its score on. So there, we put in some fake answers, and this community happens to be at a level 3, which is marginally stable with some leadership and limited discrimination and inequality, and possibly some participation of women. So one note on this sheet, over to the right, is this kind of blacked out box. And it's, if you're able to read it, it says decision considerations. It's intentionally blacked out for now, but below are a couple descriptors of why these questions are being asked and what the answers might mean for making decisions. So this is going to be updated over time and extended. It's blacked out now because there's no need to consider it, but it may become a formalized way in which the tool is used for making decisions. So that's it for social and cultural. We're going to move on to the institutional capacity. So the first question is, what level do administrative agencies or companies for drinking water exist? Water services exist. So you answer each one. So none. So we're going to say that there's not none. There are some. So yes, there are some at the national level. Maybe there aren't any at a state level or province, but the local level there are a few. And we can say the national level there's maybe Water Resources Council. And there's some examples here: Ministry of Health, Urban Planning, Department of Natural Resources that may exist in the country in which you're working. At the local level, there's a local water board. And you can make more notes at the side here. Next, it asks a few yes or no questions about agency actions. So, are records kept? Does the primary drinking water agency respond to community demands? Do they have the ability to plan and make policies? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Are policies currently being realized? So if they are able to make policies and plan, do those happen, or are they just kind of a formality and there's no way to enforce them or make them happen? And does the primary drinking water agency have the authority to enforce policy? It's another similar question. So if they're made, and maybe they are happening, but if they weren't happening, there would be no mechanism. There's no legal mechanism that would allow the agency to enforce them. You may have a yes, yes, and a no here. So legislation, is there legislation with mention of drinking water supplies? And you have some directives here. So if you answer no to this question, you can essentially just skip down to 4. If you answer no to that, you can skip down to 6. And there's a variety of questions here. They're all yes-no questions that you can answer. And I'll answer a few so that we end up with a score at the bottom here. So specific legislation, so just like the water testing, there's an area here where if you want to input some specific legislation, you can add some cells in a table. There's some questions about schools, primary school, secondary school, technical schools, or any other schools. You can say yes or no to those questions, and then there's a table for you to input them. So if there's a primary school, you say First Elementary, and it has 250 students, and you can say it's in the center of town, maybe. And maybe there's one on the outside, Second Elementary, that only has 60 students, and it's on the border of town. So that's the type of information you can enter in here. And again, we have the category levels, and then a score. So the next tab is human resources. So this one looks a little bit different. All you have to pay attention to are the highlighted, the green cells. And it asks about skills in the community. Do they exist? And they're in categories: professional, skilled labor, unskilled labor, or literate. And you can go through and look and say yes or no to any of these questions. And I'm going to change, they're all no by default. But I'm going to change a few to yes. Let's see. So change a few to yes, and we'll see what our score ends up being. So you can see as it's going along, as you change. So let's change something in skilled labor. So if you look right here at skilled labor, when I change this to a yes, it'll pop up to a 5, so it's 5 out of 9. There's 2 professional skills, 1 unskilled, 0 literate. If you have the higher skills, you're more likely going to have these lower skills. And there's a score, points total, that's adding up at the bottom here. And you can see these are the thresholds. So for level 1, you just need 1 point. Level 2 is a minimum of 5.5. Level 3 is 11.5, 23, 33. The points are added here, and then your level is assigned below. So that's it for human resource. Now for the technical capacity, some more basic questions in maintenance and operations. How often is maintenance performed? It's a yes or actually it's not a yes or no. It's a regularly, sometimes, or rarely, never. So the drop box gives you the solutions. What types of maintenance and checks are performed? You have 5 options: minor repairs, major repairs, treatment or collection system repairs, pipe system repairs, or water meters. You can input all of those. You have 5 possibilities, and if there's only one, you just change one. There's only minor repairs, and you leave the rest as not available. So a couple more questions. Talking about treatment here, you have 3: biological, chemical, or physical. You can do up to 3, you can do 0, whatever applies. A few more questions there that are yes or no, except for this last one: how is water stored? So there's some options: in a container with wide opening, without a cover, with a cover, small opening, or some other way. Supply chain, so this looks at parts, technical parts suppliers and manufacturers that are accessible, and they're by scale. So you have national supplier, regional supplier, local manufacturer, a national manufacturer with a regional supplier, or a national manufacturer and a local supplier. You can select as many that apply and enter them here, and then you have your score at the bottom. So technical, move on. The next category is energy. It's another set of questions with drop-down boxes. Talks about the grid, access to energy, on or off the grid, what type, electricity or organic being wood or burning something. If it's organic, fuel, local or imported, abundance of that local fuel, maybe it's scarce, and reliability. How many outages are there? So are they long and frequent? Are they short and frequent? Are they occasional? Are they rare? And altogether, you end up with your category here. This last section is red because it's very optional. It's access to power in kilowatt hours per person per year. Something you may find in a report, or maybe information that you can find somewhere, but it's not critical to the decision support mechanisms, so it's an optional category of information. So the 11th category, financial and economic capacity. So this is another series of questions with drop-down boxes. Talks about the scale of private sector participation, user fees for services, and there's some tables at the bottom here. So for example, for this one, you have a user fee classification. There's a chart here that explains what each classification means. So whether it's a uniform flat, block rate, decreasing block, or maybe they're not being charged at all. Budgeting, there's an annual budget, a basic budget. Is it tracked annually, tracked quarterly? You can choose the one that best applies. Assets possessed by the community, and this is a one of three. You can see they're listed here: land, cash, and equipment. So maybe they don't have cash, but they have land and they have some equipment. You have 2 out of 3. Financial sustainability level. So this is where you have another reference table. You have unviable, loss-making utilities, pay-as-you-go, recovery of cash needs, cost recovery, sustainable cost recovery, and credit-worthy. And there's definitions on the side. So based on those definitions, you can choose which one best applies to the community, or you can select a blank box there. Is there access to banking? Say yes. Is there access to credit? And that may be a good or a bad thing, but it's just a yes or no question. Average household income, which is updated. We can see 300. This is the same number we put into the basic info category, so it just updated it here. And income disparities also updates here. And that all goes in, and you get a level and a score, level description and a score listed here. So finally, the last category of information is the community identified need. So this allows you to input data about what solutions or needs the community has identified. So in your conversations, have they said, we really need a drilled well? So you can change this to yes. Or we would really like to do some rainwater harvesting. And you can say yes here. And this is important because the community buy-in is really important, and community-generated solutions and needs are important to listen to because they already clearly have buy-in if they're coming up with these solutions, and they may be good solutions, they may not be good solutions, but those conversations and working with the community to identify the ultimate solution is very important. And so you can work through all of these and answer yes or no. It's no by default, but you may change some of them to yes. So all of this is the data input, the data collection for a community, and it provides a big overview of a lot of categories, a lot of types of information about a community and about the context that you'll be working in when trying to address water sanitation or hygiene issues. So the solution evals, which I did not mention at the beginning because it's not one of the outputs per se, but it was mentioned in the earlier categories where you had solution options for a community. And this is the tab I was talking about. My little yellow note said, see the solution evals tab. That's located right here. And this is where the solutions are given a rating. And these ratings will be already input into the system before you get the spreadsheet. Right now, they are not scientifically rated. This is just for showing the functionality and the ability of the tool to make these comparisons. At a future date, they will be updated to show expert opinion. But I'll show you a little bit of the format. Don't get bogged down in this spreadsheet. But for example, we'll say, okay, rainwater in a rural setting is number 20 down here. I'm going to highlight this whole row. And there's a variety of categories in which you can rate rainwater rural outside of the context of the community, just in general as a technology for providing more water, a source of water. And so the first is a wash history, and you got a couple of things: required, helpful, or not necessary. In most cases, it's going to be helpful to have a wash history. In some cases, it may be required. It may be the sort of thing where if there's no experience with that technology, it is almost certain to not work as newly entered into a community. Or it may be not necessary at all to have any history with the technology. So we're going to leave this one at helpful. Shown to be effective setting. So this is specified as a rural technology. So maybe it works for rural and semi-rural areas. You can see in the solutions here you have any combination of rural, semi-rural, urban, or urban slum. And you can, so this will be set. So there may be some technologies that only work in urban settings. Maybe they work in any setting, which is here. Maybe it's just a rural technology. That can be input there. So for social and cultural, they're given a 0 or 1 through 5, essentially, just like the community is, and you have all these rankings going across. So that's all I'm going to say about this tab. It's something that you probably won't spend much time, other than if you need to input new technologies that you run across. You can come down here, and in any of these boxes, here's an example, new solution. So you type it in, and then you can answer these questions about it. So community profile, this is what I showed you before. Here's the intro, and here's the profile. So we see that everything's changed. So based on those few questions that I answered not accurately, but these levels have gone from 1s to between a 2 and a 4, it appears. And you can see the assessments have also changed. Like, for example, the human resource assessment of 3 means they're skilled, unskilled, and some skilled labor force. For 4, energy, you have intermittent grid power and continuous off-grid power. And so you can look through, and this is basically the summary of all of that data that you put in. And these are the numbers that are now assigned as attributes to the community, to the current levels of the community. And when you compare them against a technology, so say a technology requires a very high social and cultural capacity, for example. So maybe the technology requires a 5. This community has a 3, so in order to sustain that technology, they would have to increase their social and cultural capacity to be able to sustain it. That one's a little bit harder to grasp. Energy might be a good one. So say a technology is very energy intense, and it requires a 5. It requires consistent grid power. This one is intermittent grid power and continuous off-grid. So it's very close, but it would require some upgrades in their energy infrastructure in order to sustain that technology, or it's likely to fail. So this community profile is put into the matching profile, and now we have some green solutions, some red, and some yellow. And so this is hopefully helped refine down the solutions, because we have fake data, data that is not scientifically proven in here right now, just to show the functionality. We have a lot of green, a lot of yellow. It was intended to have equal amounts of both, be kind of in the middle of the road, so that we could prove that the highlighting mechanisms and all of that worked. So you see a lot of solutions that come to the surface here, but you can look through and you can say, okay, the red ones you're going to more than likely going to rule out. The yellow ones, you'd have to look at why they're yellow. So this one, for example, shows the biosand filter is lacking, and this may or may not be true for biosand in this V column, which is technical. So there's not enough technical capacity in the community. So you would say, okay, so if we want to do biosand, it matches pretty well everywhere else, but we would have to boost the technical ability of the community. So maybe that means developing some education programs, some certificate, technical certificate that teaches locals how to manage this type of technology. And so that may be able to boost the technology, or boost the community level up so that it matches the technology level. So that's the example of how this spreadsheet can be used to evaluate the different possible solutions as you're weighing your options. And so finally at the end, and I left this until the very end because it does not contribute directly to the decision support mechanism. It's included here as a tool, additional tool for gathering information. It's a detailed WATSAN history, or water and sanitation history. Before we had the general history, if you remember, that was one of the early tabs, where it's only does this exist or not, essentially. This is a lot more information. So you can go to a water point and you can collect very detailed information about each type of water point, how it's functioning, who implemented it, is it improved or not improved, you can include a photo, what's the type of water point, the source, how many people use it, lots of questions about each one. And so this allows you to collect very detailed information about, and there's sanitation included here, about water in a community. You even have well water and water quality testing. So this is an additional tool to be used at the end. But that is the end of the decision support tool for Wasrag, and we'll pop back to the introduction, and that is it. So just as a way of review, we have tabs across the bottom. There are 12 categories of information. In each one of those tabs there are a series of questions, some with drop-down boxes for answers. That information can be collected in a variety of different ways and input into the tool. Those inputs go towards creating a community profile across a variety of categories. That profile includes 1 through 5 assessments in each category, and also a text assessment, an interpretation of what that number means. That community profile is then compared to some technology ratings that are also on a 1 through 5 scale, technology or solution ratings. And when you compare those, you have quick comparisons of whether a specific solution is likely or not likely to be sustainable in a particular context. But you also have solutions that kind of fall right at the fringe. And those are solutions where you may be able to identify the area in which the community comes up a little bit short, and you might need to address with some sort of program.